Hey guys, Incendavery here, and today we're going to be looking at another one of my old sketchbooks. And this one is actually quite exciting because it is the sketchbook that I drew my first diary comics, my first Corvid comics in. So I've been looking forward to filming this one for quite a while now. This is a Moleskine. As you can see on the front, it's got this sigil that I'd made in one of my earlier sketchbooks that just, represents me, that I put on a lot of my sketchbooks at the time. There it is again on the title page. And I kept this sketchbook from November of 2015 to May of 2016. I believe I bought this sketchbook because I had just finished a sketchbook and I was going on a trip from California to Vermont to visit my partner's family, and I had thought, oh well, I'll get a sketchbook from one of the local shops once I get there. But then I realized at the airport that I really wanted a sketchbook right then, so I went and got a Moleskine from one of the airport shops. It's alright. Ultimately I feel like the pages were a bit too thin than what I liked, but it was a very sturdy, attractive sketchbook. This first page, I believe, was just me trying to warm up while sitting in the airport. Lots of little chunky blobular cats. I think these were definitely influenced by the Neko Atsume cats, even though they aren't really that exact model. Here I was drawing some people in the airport. Got some detailed ears from someone I was observing, view out the window of the airplane, a bonus lady with a huge creepy eye in her face. I also obviously wasn't very pleased with whatever was under these stickers, so I just covered them up with some stickers I had so that I remember feeling like if I didn't cover up whatever was under there, I wouldn't be willing to keep going and finish the sketchbook, so I guess it's good I did, although I wish now that I knew what was under there so that I could, compare and see how I've grown. Oh well. More random faces that I believe I was sketching from other people on the airplane. They're probably in the rows in front of me since I'm viewing them from the back. Again, another sketch that I wasn't very pleased with and blocked off these stickers. I can see the head of a guitar back here. So I really wish I hadn't covered this up, because since I do so much Metalocalypse fan art, I've gotten pretty good at drawing guitars, so I wish I could have seen what one of my first attempts at drawing a guitar was like. I also scratched out this, which looks like maybe a dragon. And then here I have gotten to Vermont. These are all drawings from life, from different animals at my partner's brother's family's home. So we had these goldfish. Looks like their names are Cheeky and Bruiser. They're those goldfish that have the really big puffy eyes. Axolotl. I don't have it written down, but I do know that the axolotl's name is Friend. Some ducks. I really like this suspicious duck. Some notes I made to myself while browsing through their bookshelves. Some sketches of their cats, Beezer and Polly. It looks like I sketched a floor plan of their house. It's not creepy. That is actually a good exercise for visualizing spaces, as if you're in a new space, try to reconstruct the floor plan. But it does make you look a little creepy. And then some various other practices. A bird from, I don't think I referenced that, that looks like that was just a bird from my head. An eye and an eye inside a mouth, branches. Here my partner's nephew had offered me the use of some of his markers and colored pencils. So I swatched out all the colored pencils and started playing around with the markers. I made an abstract pattern with some colors I liked. Drew some coffee beans in red and brown. It's actually kind of a neat color scheme. I never think to pair reds and browns, but they look nice together. This was, I think, referenced from a plant that was on the table in front of me, and I think this turned out really nicely. I liked how it turned out then, and I like how it turned out now. Another mouth with an eyeball inside of it. I guess I drew a lot of that. And another axolotl up at the top. Then I went outside, I drew their pigs, and I drew their goats. I drew more of their axolotls, their cat again. Here in the corner it looks like I was trying to conceptualize how a cat with 6 legs would work. This page was drawn when we went into the nearest town, Brattleboro. For some reason I went and sat by myself for a while. I remember what I was eating. It was the first time I'd had poutine, and it was delicious. But I sat by myself while eating my poutine. I drew some passersby on the street. I drew some scenery that I saw. I also had a very friendly older lady sit next to me and give me her recipe for bone jelly, how to boil down bones into a jelly and add it to stuff. So here's a very tiny recipe, my notes, on how to do that. Here are some doodles from the plane ride home, I believe. This was like a face off a magazine, but there was only like half, so like the picture only had half the face, so I covered the rest with this like rainbow burst. There's some rabbits and playing around with the logo. I sketched. I think this must have been from reference. Maybe someone was holding hands with someone else near me and I sketched that. Or possibly that's my own hand. The angle is about right. And there's Rick and Morty doing that face, and Aidan in the Rick and Morty style doing that face as well.
I love that face!
Here I'm back home. This, I believe, was done at the Queer Center. I don't know what the meetup was, whether it was a general meetup or one of the trans groups. I think a general meetup. There's my Fursona. I haven't drawn them in a while, but before I started drawing the Corbid, I did have like a deer Fursona. I drew a lot. And then lots of people just drawing from reference at the Cantu Center. This one was not from reference, but all these other ones were just me drawing what I saw. We've also got a turkey recipe here. I'm not sure why I had a turkey recipe. Someone must have been saying it. Here's more drawing people from reference. This looks like it was maybe at a lecture in one of the lecture halls before class started. There's also some early concepts for my partner Aidan's tattoo. It's like a push knife breaking through some chains. Here's more sketches. Again, probably before class. That was one of my linguistics classmates. Looks like I was testing some Sharpies in the corner here. Some amethysts along with like angled head practice. Some hand practice. And then down here, KZSC was the college radio station I worked at and DJ'd for. So we've got some like concepts at logos and also me trying to make them a sigil out of, not that anyone asked me to, just because I liked to make sigils out of everything. Tried to make a sigil out of the letters KZSC. Here is a quick drawing of Aidan. Here is some notes for, even back then I wanted to do a comic having to do with a radio DJ, and I still haven't drawn a comic like that, which is too bad. I almost did this year about a radio DJ in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, but like, the farther we got into 2020, the less fun and more in poor taste a comic about the post-apocalypse seemed, so I eventually dropped it. This looks like maybe instructions for a tarot spread, and this is a list of, if I have to guess, this is like a list of things that I wanted to bring up with a therapist. You know, since the Corvid comics appear later in this sketchbook, and those were something that my therapist at the time had me do, it would make sense that this is me right now preparing to start seeing a therapist. Here's one of my D&D characters from the time. They are a tiefling named Joy and Sorrow. I don't really remember anything about them, but I do like that name. I got it from like a list of old American Puritan names. Here are some sketches of Isabel and Celeste. Isabel and Celeste from Animal Crossing. I also swatched some highlighters here, it looks like, because I was playing a lot of Animal Crossing and I really liked Isabel and Celeste. I thought they were very cute. And here actually, I often publicly count like the Punk and the Pigeon as my first short comic, but this was probably actually my first completed short comic. I had done the thumbnails while at work, just on the side of some training notes, I remember. and then I did the pencil lines in this notebook, and then similar to my art most of my art up to this point, I would scan it and then use the pencil as basically finished line art once it had been like cleaned up a bit, like gotten rid of little scribbly bits that I couldn't quite erase, and then colored it digitally. So this is a just little short fan comic about Isabel and Celeste. And there's page 2. It's not anything like spectacular, but I do remember spending a lot of time on this background trying to get everything looking right. Page 3. Page 4. Remember, I can't remember. I think Isabel is the only one who doesn't have a coffee order at the Roost. I could be wrong, but I think I made up that coffee order. It's like the sweetest possible coffee. And then there's page number 5. I think this is a really cute panel. And I also really like this Celeste. I think that turned out really funny. And then there's page 6. The end. Again, I was actually pretty proud of this closing panel. I don't know, I think it can be kind of harder than you would think to like tie up even short stories very neatly. I think that was like a cute note to end on. Yeah, that was my actual first ever completed short comic. 6 pages long. And then here, we got some different, again, trying to make sigils out of Aidan's name and a friend's name. That looks like Nia. I think that might be Blue Pearl and Yellow Pearl. And that kind of looks like the face from Clem from Clementine and Friends. More Fursona stuff. Got 2 more outfits with the Fursona, and then trying to decide whether the pros and cons for plantigrade versus digitigrade. I don't think I ever decided before this sort of design started falling out of use. I'd like to draw this Fursona more often. I think it's a fun design. I really like the smooth head and the little round dot freckle kind of spots on the face. Here are some feet and hands, and then my 3 favorite ACNL villagers, Stitches, Coco, and Beardo. I love those 3. I actually recently found my Animal Crossing New Leaf copy, and I want to start playing it again, but I haven't opened it yet because I'm really afraid one of these 3, or 2 or 3 of them, maybe all of them have moved out. I really want them to still be there, so I'm afraid to open it. And then here's another design I was trying to make for the radio station, sort of playing with design elements of like CD, vinyl, headphones, and microphones. More KZSC radio station glyphs. And then here is the Fursona again, sort of trying to... Oh, actually I think that's it. These hands and feet here, I was sort of experimenting with putting like dark sections at the end to sort of emulate hoofs, so that you had sort of the plantigrade feet, human plantigrade feet, human hands, but sort of the dark marks on the toes and balls of the feet and the sort of outer portion of the finger, so that it sort of emulated. See, that's a really neat design element. I should draw this guy more often. This looks like Aidan's handwriting here. Draw me like one of your Vox deer. Here's just a little gag comic. There's that song in SpongeBob, sailing over the Dogger Bank. So I thought, like, what if instead of the Dogger Bank, it was the Doggo Bank? Because it's full of dogs. I don't know, this was a total flop when I posted it, but I still think it's pretty funny. And then this is definitely the start of therapy, because this is like one of my homework assignments from therapy, where I need to like every day list 3 things that like work or that like made me happy. So you can see like me listing a bunch of them. This was before I had a planner, which is where I would later do this kind of stuff. Here, looks like I was experimenting with some calligraphy, and then there's some various notes in between. see a note about doing OSHA training, and it looks like I wrote some lyrics from a MC Lars song. Not the first Hipster Girl song, like the other song where Hipster Girl is grown up.
Hipster Mom.
Hipster Mom. It looks like Hipster Mom might have been stuck in my head, so I wrote down the lyrics to try and exorcise it. But yeah, doing some calligraphy. See, I did Lonely Riot, which is, at the time, I think just Aidan's band. Now it's a two-piece with me and Aidan. I actually have one of our sets up on this channel. If you want to watch it, I'll link it up in, like, the corner. My name, Strain Zero, which was Aidan's band. More Fursona stuff. This looks like it was planning out my Animal Crossing house and trying to make a sigil for the concept of Involk? I don't remember how to pronounce that. The spring circle of the year, wheel of the year holiday, I think. Here's more calligraphy stuff. Practicing D's and A's and flourishes. Some of these are really cool. I like that one. I probably had like something like calligraphy flourishes pulled up on Google Images to reference. I don't think I came up with all of these out of my own head. More calligraphy with my name and some flourishes, plus a little shopping list. Again, more therapy homework, trying to figure out what sort of self-talk works. And I seem to have the note here that at the time I didn't really have any positive self-talk examples. Just, like, the closest to positive self-talk I got at the time was rejecting negative self-talk, which, well, that's progress from accepting negative self-talk. Rejecting negative self-talk is not the same thing as having positive self-talk. And then also tracking a bit how I slept. I've had sleeping problems my entire life. It's not gone away. More Fursona stuff. Little leopard gecko. And then these two were drawn, I think, by two different friends. Here, I think this was me attempting to draw myself in the room I was sitting in, the hotel lobby, from the security camera. So I was like looking at the security camera and referencing the room I was sitting in while I was drawing it. Cool concept, although I didn't really finish the picture. Here's more therapy homework with journaling. Yeah, tracking my mood, tracking things that worked or made me feel happy, and tracking the kinds of self-talk I tended to do. Here's more calligraphy practice. And more of it. Tried doing like an accent with like a gold Sharpie. More calligraphy practice. More calligraphy practice. And also a little Fursona drawing with some AJJ lyrics there. Songs that from Aidan, you won't make you suck any less. That's from Coco Pelly Face Tattoo by AJJ. And then more Fursona stuff. Doing sort of an outfit and pose. And then this was one that I like sketched it, colored it digitally, and then later came back and tried coloring it with some markers I got later on. Didn't totally work. I think I can definitely tell here that I was trying to mix an alcohol-based marker with a water-based marker and not really understanding why that wasn't working. More calligraphy practice. This seems like something that was like a Tumblr post at the time. I don't know if it actually was or if I was just mixing and matching elements. There's like an intentionally shitty anime style doodle and just a pose that I didn't really continue with. There's just a random furry. I don't know what was here. The page has been cut out. And here's where I got markers for the first time. Winsor & Newton had just brought the brush markers and pro markers from Letraset. So they were changing the packaging So all the old packaging with the Letraset logo was being sold for much cheaper than usual. So I took the opportunity to buy a small selection of markers. So here I am testing them out. We've got some water-based ones and we've got some alcohol-based ones. Again, at the time I didn't really understand what the difference between the two were. I knew that there was a difference just because the staff at the store that I bought them at told me so. But I didn't really understand what the difference between them was, or which ones I liked better, or how to use either of them, pros and cons, you know. And then here, testing, trying to shade with some of them. This actually right here is the very first concepts for Corvid comics, believe it or not. So I'd been doing this sort of homework assigned by my therapist up until this point. You've seen that of like recording the negative self-talk, recording things that worked, recording my mood. Because the specific type of therapy I was doing was cognitive behavioral therapy, which is all about like analyzing your behavior, deciding which behaviors are helpful and which aren't, and then reinforcing the helpful behaviors while trying to change the unhelpful behaviors and thus sort of change your mindset. So one of my CBT homework assignments was my therapist had said, okay, you really like to draw, so I want you to design a very easy to draw character. Something that can represent you, that you can sort of whip out really easily with just a few lines. You don't need to fuss too much about it being perfect. So this is where I was trying to design that easy to draw character. So you can see I was sort of trying to use my Fursona, but sort of realized that that was a little too complicated. I tried a cat. I tried a really cartoony human version of myself. I tried a little skeleton. I even tried a shape and a gem. And ultimately oh, no, it's not here. This is just more marker swatches, swatching my new markers. More marker swatches. Okay, and here's some geckos. Here we go. This is where I decided that I wanted my little character to be a Corvid. And at the time, I was seeing a lot of crows when I walked home from work. Like, I would walk through the park and there would be just these huge swarms of them in the trees. But at the time, I didn't really know how to identify a crow from a raven. I didn't know which they were, so I just said Corvid in general. I've sort of retroactively decided that since they were crows, my Corvid is a crow. You can see I was testing out, like, deciding on the colors. I didn't originally purchase a gray or black marker, so I decided to make the crow purple, which was my favorite color. I also originally thought that maybe I would have the crow be a bird, like a full bird in some, but then in some comics that might require like a human body wearing clothes, or a human body for the point to come across, that maybe I would have like a human body with a crow head. I never really ended up doing that. I think later on there's one comic where I did that I just sort of ended up abandoning. The whole point of the design was supposed to be that it was simple, and a human body was not simple, so it just ended up not being a good fit for the comics, even though it was kind of a cool idea. And then here is the very first Corvid comic that I ever drew. You can see I drew it with micron pens, so I hadn't realized yet that the micron pens, and if you color over it with an alcohol marker, it will smear every time. So if you're combining alcohol markers and micron pens, you need to put down the alcohol markers first and then the lines with the micron pens. Or what I ended up doing is I ended up switching to the classic Sakura gel pens, jelly roll pens, which I have found work really well with not smearing the alcohol marker. I also at the time colored in the speech bubbles a light yellow. I didn't realize yet that the pastel colors I went through very quickly and would need to conserve, and that it was just really more work than it was worth coloring them in. And finally, I also introduced a weird continuity error right from the start. I sort of decided later that I didn't want the Corbid to be named Dave, and that I wanted to keep like a little space between Dave the person and the Corvid representation of myself. But in this comic, the Corvid is specifically referred to as Dave because I was very frustrated with the fact that people on the phone at my work would not believe that my name was Dave. Anyway, first Corvid comic. And then here is my second Corvid comic. And this is probably still my most popular comic. I was mainly posting fan art up to this point on my Tumblr and getting like a handful of notes, and I just continued posting these because I was like, well, I drew it, why not post it? You can also see I think this is the first one drawn in gel pen. I just noticed that. I posted this, and then actually like a week or two after I posted it, a bigger account reblogged it, and suddenly it just really took off. And suddenly I was actually getting notes on things. And even weirder, up until this point, I had the usual problem of if people did give me notes on my stuff, they really only cared about the fan art. And these were a really big tipping point where people were coming to my page specifically for these. And then here are some designs for a anthology submission, I believe, that didn't get accepted. There was again sort of the idea of a post-apocalyptic wasteland, and I believe this character was like a librarian in charge of the sort of music library for a radio station, and sort of preserving it in this post-apocalyptic wasteland. Here is another Corvid comic. And you can see even early on, I sort of started off with this certain palette that I used for my backgrounds of pink, yellow, blue, and orange predominantly, and I still kind of stick to that. Although I think if I was making this comic now, these pink panels would probably be gray rather than pink, to sort of fit more into the emotional color language I've developed for the comic. Here's the first introduction of the internal dialogue Corvids. So they're two little Corvids that live inside my Corvid's head, and they're sort of inspired by those good and evil shoulder angels, but instead of like good and evil, the red one sort of represents passion, impulsiveness, anger, and determination, and the blue one sort of represents calmness, melancholy, depressiveness, passiveness. And I sort of liked the idea that, like, neither one of them is really in the right 100% of the time. Yeah, here is more concepts for that post-apocalyptic story about the librarian and the DJ, and I don't remember a lot of details of the story. I think one was traveling to try and re-find the other in this post-apocalyptic wasteland. This character design is pretty cool. I like that. Yeah, here's more designs for the librarian. Again, this comic never really got completed because it didn't get accepted for the anthology, but I still think this is a cool character design. I think I've mentioned this comic before. Another page of that comic with the punk parrot and the grindcore goat never got finished, but there's a sort of half page of it. Here is this was supposed to be sort of a self-affirming piece. Oh, I do remember where the words "I am important and unavoidable" came from. They're from Wizard People, dear reader, which is like, if you know Brad Neely, the guy who did the Professor Brothers, he's done like a bunch of like comedy stuff on YouTube. He basically did this like dubbing over of the Harry Potter movies, just the first Harry Potter movie, where like on the screen it's the Harry Potter movie, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, but rather than the regular dialogue, it's just Brad Neely doing this like jumbled up, like mangled retelling of the Harry Potter story. There are some parts that use questionable humor. I would say on par, like, you know, your average Adult Swim. So there are some parts that are kind of, but there are a lot of parts that are really funny, and, you know, slipped into this nonsense, there are some genuinely inspirational lines, and one of them is,
"I am important and unavoidable."
Here is another Corvid comic, sort of trying to describe anxiety. I also I'd been adding to my marker collection, so I tried out a gray marker to see how I liked that for the crow. And I did decide that even though I now had a gray marker and could make the crow black, I still liked the purple crow better. I also tried to make like a little mascot for KZSC. That didn't really take off, but I still think it looks cute. There's more character designs and for the librarian, trying to sort of work out their body type and face. More trying to like design logos or designs for KZSC. Also more sigils for KZSC, kind of trying to make it look like a broadcasting tower. There is Fritz from The Quick and Dirty Life of Fritz Fargo. I'd been reading it at the time. I think it's still going. There's a lot of ideas on liminal spaces. I don't remember what I was really trying to do with that. It looks like I was trying to connect it to some sort of world building. This looks like it's the first time that the squirrel appears in my comics. The squirrel, it represents my partner Aidan, and they originally chose a squirrel because there were two squirrels with black fur that would run around our yard. We nicknamed them Duke and Earl. So when I asked them what they wanted to, how they wanted to be represented in my comics, they said they wanted to be a squirrel. Here is a Corvid comic with me interacting with a customer. I chose a pig because I had drawn them earlier in the sketchbook. Often when choosing background characters or side characters that won't reappear, I tend to choose whatever animal I've been drawing lately. Oh, I have a note here, it's hard to draw a pig whistling. I didn't think of that, yeah. Here's another comic. I sort of realized with this that, like, this really long format doesn't work really with Tumblr, which was the only place I was posting them at the time. I do really like this concept of the motivation cloud just sort of drifting away. I think that's clever. Here's another Corvid comic. And again, just chose a cat as a side character. Yeah, I mentioned before that I was considering having, like, the crow's head on a human body for, like, comics that would require a human body to sort of make sense. And here was me trying to implement that idea, and ultimately it was just too complicated, and this comic didn't end up getting finished. Here is a illustration for Ostara, and at the time I was still sort of following the Wheel of the Year. Here's a rough draft for, you can see the way I sort of do the crow's rough draft, because it's sort of changed. Here it's sort of like a hook-shaped head, whereas now I sort of rough draft it with like the circle for the head and the like beak shape. This is a rough draft for this one on the next page. Making comics about intrusive thoughts is always that one of like, if you make the intrusive thoughts you're talking about too bad, people will be like, what the hell? Why would you think that, you monster? And if you make them too tame, then you'll get a bunch of people being like, that's nothing, you want to hear about my intrusive thoughts? And then they tell you some terrible intrusive thoughts they have. And either way, it's not fun, so I don't do a lot of comics about intrusive thoughts anymore. Here is another Corvid comic about diet and food. This is a really pretty blue. I wonder what this blue I was using was. It's not one I still have. And here is another comic. Sort of talking about that feeling about how holidays don't really feel special anymore when you're a working adult who doesn't really live with, like, family. There's no real reason to treat, you need to go into work anyways, there's no real reason to treat it anything other than any other day. Here is another diary comic. Lots of comics from here on out, as you may have seen. This looks like a side character, but actually was not. That was Aidan's sister who was visiting. The garbage soda I didn't find directly in front of her. I think it was a soda that came from the garbage that was in the fridge, but I sort of, even though it was real events, I sort of compacted them chronologically to be able to fit into 4 panels smoothly. Here is a sketch that never ended up being a finished diary comic. It's about watching BoJack Horseman. Good show, I like it a lot. There is that little mascot that I'd made for KZSC. I think this turned out really cute, and the idea was that there would be sort of like a larger sort of semi-realistic style version and like a little short, cute version that could be like slapped on. Like, the idea was this could be like go on different things like season programs and stuff like that. It's a cute design, I think. And this one was actually, I think, the first diary comic I did that was written by someone else. I did that more often in the earlier days of my comics. I would ask Aidan or one of my friends to sort of just write me a quick script based on their own experiences or what was troubling them, and then I would draw it for them. Oh, okay, this was like not just like a 3-panel comic, this was like a 9-panel comic that I drew in 3 parts and then stitched together digitally to post. And then here is another, this is a script for one that'll come later that another one of my friends wrote. So I wrote down the script here. Here is another comic just about frustration and anger. Comic about new face soap. Here you can tell I haven't settled on which tone of gray to use for Aidan's squirrel. And then here is that script that my friend wrote. So this is another 9-panel comic that I drew in 3 parts. So they requested a husky. So here is the first 3 panels. Oh, and then I guess I took a break to draw this diary comic. And then there's the next 3 panels for the diary comic that my friend scripted. And then another break. I think this was a prompt from the Fursona generator. And I still didn't feel super confident coloring with markers, so this one I drew and lined traditionally, and then scanned in and colored. I think this is really, really cute. I like this design. Yeah, here's the original prompt from the Fursona generator. Black and orange spotted Siamese. It wears frilly dresses. It has far too many teeth and they are all sharp. So you can see I sort of made the teeth in like a halos and in there. Here is another diary comic. I don't think this joke landed completely, but sort of talking about how like when you're working in the service or hospitality industry, your weekends aren't actually usually your weekend on the weekend. And there is another Fursona generator prompt. I think this one was for my friend. I don't have the original prompt written down, but I think this is really pretty. And this is another one that I drew traditionally and then colored digitally. Here's another diary comic. I don't really remember the context for this. Here I was sketching in a coffee shop in downtown Santa Cruz, which is where I lived at the time. So I was sketching sort of this across all the buildings across the street. And then the coffee had like a little latte art creature. And so before I drank it, I sort of took a picture and then sort of did a little character design based on what the latte art looked like. I think this is really cool. I really liked that at the time and I still really like it. And then here is the 3rd and final part of the 9-panel comic that my friend scripted. And again, those got drawn slowly and then the 3 parts were stitched together to be posted. And then here's another comic. And here's something I've written down. I don't remember if that was like something that I was thinking or if that's something someone said to me or if it was supposed to be like a script for a comic. I don't know. And there's a comic about not quite getting misgendered, but that's sort of like when this person sort of like clocks that you might be transgender and they don't say anything, but they act sort of weird about it. That happened to me like lots of times every day since I worked in the hospitality industry. Another diary comic about unwelcome customers. Again, I drew a pig because I'd been drawing pigs earlier. I think I did a conscious effort to stop drawing pigs because I felt like they didn't need any more negative press, even though there was something that I had figured out how to draw. Another diary comic about coffee and smoking. Here's a diary comic about echolalia. I haven't seen any of Baz Luhrmann's films, but his name, just Baz Luhrmann, gets stuck in my head a lot. Probably after finishing filming this, I'll be sitting with myself and I'll just be thinking, Baz Luhrmann. And then there's another Fursona generator design I did for one of my friends. Chocolate rabbit, boots with stickers, and multiple pupils. Here is another comic with me, Aidan, and a friend of ours just talking about odd places to get clothes. Here here is a diary comic about negative self-talk. A couple more notes for possible later comics. Here's a diary comic about picking your nose until it bleeds. Gross. You can really tell I was trying to go all in with honesty on these. It was easier to be... And again, here's a comic about... Am I having my period, or do I have the stomach flu? And I was surprised it was both. I feel in some ways, when I had less people reading my comics, it was easier to be super open about this stuff. Here's a cute little comic. Here I'm comparing two purple colors of marker. I have, through the years, used several different colors of purple for the Corvid. I think I originally used the Pro Markers Orchid. At a later point, I ran out of Orchid markers and switched to Heather. I think I also used Lilac at one point, switched back to Orchid. Now I use a Copic marker in VO4. I think Lilac is the name of the color. And here, I couldn't find my gel pen, so I tried using a different pen. This is a different kind of jelly roll. I think it might be a Moonlight one, but the color was a little too light and saturated, and the lines were a bit too thick, so I didn't quite like how this one looked, so I continued using the original jelly roll rather than this. Oh, here's more of that comic with the punk pigeon and the grindcore goat. It says the end, so I guess I finished it. It must have been like a 2-panel comic, but I never ended up stitching it together and posting it. And this was based on a real thing that happened. Me, Aidan, and some friends were waiting outside a venue for a punk show to start, and this mom with some like little kids came past and said something about like, is this what punks look like nowadays? And someone, I think Aidan, said like, she's talking about us. She was like, oh no, I'm not talking about you. Then she like pulled a huge bag of candy out of her purse and gave it to us and left. And then we debated about whether or not to eat the candy, and ultimately did. I don't remember what show we were waiting for. Maybe it was Against Me? I feel like...
If Phil was there, it was Against Me.
Alright then, I was gonna say. So I think this was us waiting for an Against Me show in Santa Cruz. That was a great show. Oh, and here's another diary comic. I really love the combination of mint and pink. Yeah, this is a comic about maintaining your boundaries while still being open to people. It's harder to do than it sounds. Here's a diary comic about loving my partner. Here is a diary comic about that like realization where you're just like standing there and you realize something that happened in your past was super messed up. Let's just tuck that away because I do not want to deal with that. You know? That kind of feeling. Here is a comic about being angry. And here is some different expressions practiced, just trying to see what kind of expressions I can get out of Corbid's design, since at this point I've sort of gotten the hang of the basic shapes of it more. Like you can see that I've got the circle head, and you've got like the 2 feather bumps at the end of the head. Like I've started getting the standardized shape. Here is a comic about sort of a general sense of feeling gross without quite knowing why. Even though this is just a Aidan squirrel in the comic, I don't think Aidan wrote this. I think I wrote this for Aidan. And then here is a little drawing of a pigeon. Here is a diary comic about openness in relationships and how eventually you end up discussing really gross things with each other that you would have never brought up with each other at the beginning stages of your relationship. Here's a diary comic about feeling good. You can definitely see what I meant about like the pages being very thin, especially when it's a light color like the yellow. I really don't recommend the Moleskine sketchbooks for use with markers. For doing just pencils, they're okay. The markers, I would recommend more of a thicker mixed media paper. And then here is a diary comic about bad decisions concerning caffeine. Pigeon. Here's just some circles. Even though I'd been drawing a lot of diary comics, I was still like holding to my goal of trying to fill a sketchbook page every day. And I'm guessing this day I just didn't really have any ideas for what to draw, so I just drew some circles, getting bigger and smaller, just to try and loosen out my wrist and brain. Oh, or also possibly it looks like I forgot to put something down and the marker bled through, so I didn't want to draw anything important on this page. Here's another sigil, trying to make a sigil from the words, "Let me see the world as it is, not how I wish to see it." Oh, and then here at the back, this looks like... I think this is a drawing Aidan was making. I don't know why Aidan was drawing a little dude riding on a snake wielding an anti-fascist flag, but, you know, why not? And here's some more of Aidan's drawings here at the end. Yeah, very Aidan drawings. And I've got some post-it notes here. This is notes soprano, alto, tenor, bass for that choir comic that I've never finished writing. Oh, I guess those notes on liminal spaces from earlier in the sketchbook was an idea for a story about liminal spaces, because here's some notes on it. Trying to sort of connect the idea of liminal spaces to the concept of non-binariness, it looks like. Here's the crux of the story. Difficulty that a hero who deals in liminals and gray areas has with those who deal in certainty and absolutes. And then I guess these were maybe some... These don't seem like liminal ideas. I don't know what those were. I'm not sure what those were concepts for. If you can figure out the theme between water, fire, eggs, seeds, and running, let me know. And then, looks like we've got some papers in this pocket. Here's a little origami crane. I didn't fold this. There was a guy in Santa Cruz, maybe he's still there, who folded these tiny cranes and handed them out to people that he met on the street. Let's see. Here we have a playlist for my radio show. So here I would plan what songs I was going to play in order, and I would write them down and cross them out as I did them, and that would help me both with remembering where I was in the order of songs I was playing, and also you needed to log each song on this thing called Spinatron. And then these numbers on the side, in addition to having this list in order, I would keep the CDs that I was going to play stacked in order, so that I would put them into the... there were like 3 CD players, and I would put them into the CD players in order, and I would have the track number listed on the side, so I would easily be able to know what track to set it to. I was a very nervous DJ, so I tried to do as much prep for myself as possible. Actually, in my earlier shows, I would even script out my talking breaks. Here is a rough draft. Looks like I have 2 different rough drafts for two of the diary comics that happened. Here's another diary comic. Another rough draft. And here's another rough draft for the one about feeling bad and you don't know why. Here's a rough draft for the diary comic about making mistakes with caffeine. It's drawn on the back of this calendar page from the Bad Cats Daily. Here are some more diary comic rough drafts. It looks like there's 3 different rough drafts. At this time, I would often have multiple ideas in a sitting, and then either I would make them into multiple comics, or I would just use the best ones. This is drawn at the back of like a shift checklist for my job. Another rough draft about evolving relationships and saying gross things to each other later on in your relationships once you're comfortable with each other. Here's the rough draft for the diary comic about balancing being protective of yourself and having boundaries with being open to people. Here are my early comic commission prices. Looks like at the time I would have charged $13 for a 4-panel comic. That is not what I charge now. If you've ever thought that I'm undercharging for my commissions, man, that's nothing compared to how it used to be. Oh, here's just a priority mail sticker. It looked like I had a drawing here that I had cut out. Same here, didn't finish the rest of the sticker. Here's the rough draft for that comic about finding favorite clothes in weird places. More sticker cutouts. There's like a little Corvid head I never finished cutting out. Here is the wrapper from a throat lozenge. Looks like it was honey pomegranate flavor. The insert that came with the Moleskine. Here, it looks like this is a... Oh, this ended up getting cut down to that first comic, that 9-panel comic that Aidan wrote for me. So it looks like Aidan did sort of like a thumbnail that I ended up cutting down into that 9-panel format. And again, written on the back of a shift checklist, like a lot of these are. Here are 3 rough drafts. This one got made into a comic, but it looks like this one and this one didn't. And there is a comic that I didn't end up finishing trying to articulate sort of the intersection between experiencing misogyny and being transmasculine. I don't think I've ever done a comic about that because I don't want to debate people about that. Here is a slip of paper talking about the job duties of the station librarian for the radio station. That comic from before where I was talking about like the librarian and the DJ, that's what I meant by librarian, is like the station librarian who's in charge of like taking care of the library of music at the station. Here is a page torn out of my book, so it looks like up here we've got different notes from a meeting, trying to brainstorm like design and marketing for the station, and down here is like back and forth between me and Aidan during that same meeting, probably. This looks like some notes for a story I never really finished between 2 characters named J and K. It looks like a fake dating kind of story. Probably home for the holidays from school type of story. Oh, this looks like more from the same. J and K! Oh my god, this is a Homestuck AU. I bet anything this is a Homestuck AU, and J is John Egbert and K is Carcat Vantas. Nah, you're not slick past me. But it looks like I then took that and it looks like I was trying to convert that to more original characters. Oh, these are some different Fursona generator prompts. I guess I just did a bunch of them and wrote them down in case I wanted to draw them. And then last but not least, here is the rough draft for that comic about drinking soda you found on the ground. Yeah, and that is the end of this sketchbook. That was November 2015 through May 2016, and that was the start of my Corvid comics. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you next time in another video. Bye!
I'll edit it down to 7 minutes.